So we're Team Heimdall. Our original sponsor is Army Cyber Command, and within Army Cyber Command, our human sponsor, Major Andrew Faber, sits in the Cyber Protection Brigade, which is down in Fort Gordon. So that was our initial point of contact, and that ended up being our final point of contact. There's a story in between. So my name, as I mentioned, is Gael. I'm a computer science student here.
So
I'm Julian. I'm a senior also in computer science.
Matt, I'm a second-year business school student with involvement in the computer science department.
I'm Raphael. I'm a senior at the college studying political science.
Alidan, I'm a senior studying computer science.
Okay. So here is the original problem statement that we received from our sponsor and that we were really excited to work with. It mostly revolved around integrating new technologies for the automatic detection of malware and other threat analysis. It was in conjunction with and trying to integrate with what Plan X, DARPA's Plan X was currently working on. So we were really excited to work with Plan X to develop, to learn about the primary problems within this field and develop some new solutions. Now from this, after our original call, our very first call with Major Andrew Faber, the problem seemed to be a little bit different. He described something a little bit more along the lines of training. And to tell a little bit of that story, here I can show a 2-minute video narrating some of that.
We are Team Heimdall from Columbia University, and we've partnered with Army Cyber Command under the direction of lead sponsor Major Andrew Faber to tackle pain points currently plaguing our beneficiaries. Our mission began with a sponsor statement: enable Army Cyber to rapidly incorporate cutting-edge malware detection and network defense capabilities available as open source and in the private sector in order to identify and combat evolving adversary attack methods. As we immersed ourselves in the various issues and opportunities within the Cyber Protection Brigade, this problem statement began taking various yet distinct forms. In pursuit of truly understanding our task, we conducted 73 traditional interviews and numerous email exchanges. In the end, these conversations and sponsor interactions affected 4 pivots, resulting in our arrival at a real and urgent problem that the Cyber Protection Brigade is eager to solve. The 4 main issues we encountered during our beneficiary discovery are as follows. First, perceived lack of Cyber Protection Brigade training. Second, an emphasis on the automation of threat routing. Third, a need for data standardization enabling complete communication between defensive and offensive personnel, and finally, an inability to recruit for technical positions with optimal efficiency. This is our destination and continuing path of pursuit. Diving into our solution, the Cyber Protection Brigade faces extensive regulatory oversight governing its hiring process. The result is an alarmingly low 40% of the needed headcount being filled. At Fort Gordon alone, Lieutenant Colonel Gould has been able to fill just 120 of a needed 300 positions. The Cyber Protection Brigade has recently shifted strategies from hiring managerial-level civilians to a focus on interns and recent graduates. This enables the Cyber Protection Brigade to bypass many of the complex hiring procedures required for onboarding civilians while also keeping their workforce up to date with fresh ideas and eager workers. To address this problem, we've begun construction of a candidate testing platform tailored specifically to the requirements of government hiring. We aim to provide Army Cyber with a complete testing suite with the goal of enabling a more efficient and complete hiring process.
So that beautiful 3D rendered building is what basically we have to help Cyber Protection Brigade kind of fill up with actual humans. But before we go into the actual solution, here's kind of where, here's the path that we kind of took to that. Here's the journey where, going up is path towards delivering value and having low confidence versus high confidence based on both beneficiary discovery and the feedback loop with our sponsor, or at least with contacts at Cyber Protection Brigade. So we kind of envisioned the green line with some kind of hills and downfalls, kind of discovering new things from beneficiary interviews, having our ideas validated, invalidated, but overall making slow progress with somewhere around the middle, definitely having like a pivot or two. That's kind of how we envision the lean methodology kind of going along. Our experience was a little bit different with our initial call in September 15th being with a different problem than our original problem statement, where Major Faber described a problem with training new recruits. There's a lot of demand, the job is really challenging, and there needs to be some efficiencies around training. We were really excited to get started on that. Between that time, there was no contact from our sponsor or anyone at Cyber Protection Brigade, but we continued with interviews in kind of adjacent entities in the private sector and some in government and Army as well. Our contact changed somewhere around the end of October, and we, in talking to our new sponsor, the problem got redescribed a little bit towards automation, which, possibly not too unrelated to training. Maybe instead of focusing all this energy training with, making efficiencies in training, maybe there are some technological solutions that can help make some of those problems more efficient. So that was our first kind of pivot with that sharpness. Then again, we experienced some period of no contact from our sponsor, difficulty kind of getting in touch with the folks at Cyber Protection Brigade, and then our primary point of contact changed again, and that somewhere around October, and in conversations with our new point of contact, that the problem got rephrased in terms of data standardization. That's kind of the main thing that that they've been working on, and that has been preoccupying them. We had some changes there. Kind of similar story with the contact situation, but then we did something kind of bold and just called one of our previous sponsors to set up like a meeting to actually go down there. If we're there, we have to interface with all these people at once, and maybe we can kind of get to the bottom of it. And that's where we started to really see change and a lot of like optimism around the problems at Cyber Protection Brigade. And that's where our kind of learning about the civilian hiring problem that was described in the very low volume video. We started learning a little bit about that, and there's actually some pretty interesting technological problems in that space that we are hoping to help them solve.
All right, so this is where we started. Initially, like Gael mentioned, the problem that we tried to address was ineffective or inefficient training systems. So this came from one of our first few sponsor interviews and our initial sponsor contact. But like Gael also mentioned, we were then unable to get any follow-on information, so we relied on our interviews with people in adjacent fields. So the first one there is an interview with Rick Howard, who's the Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Networks. So while these folks may have some tangential information or insight into government spaces, they're not directly the people that we want to build a solution for. So he said, lack of cybersecurity knowledge can paralyze an organization. This threat is greater when governmental entities are involved, as more is at stake than just trade secrets and intellectual property. So hearing things like that from several of these individuals, we thought that addressing training would be something that would provide value to Army Cyber Command. So this was kind of our initial decision tree. So we had a limited understanding of the problem set, and then we had our initial beneficiary feedback, and we also added in kind of our own assumptions that we wanted to validate. So the first one was CPT operators are young millennials that enjoy playing video games. This was just based on, okay, who are these individuals that are working in these roles, what are their characteristics, and trying to flesh out an archetype from that. So we could have either gone the training route or the automation route, and we went the training route. So we produced an MVP that was kind of an interactive training platform, right? And we thought, well, if you create some sort of system that allows users to have fun while they're training and while they're developing these skills, it'll be something that they put more time and energy into. And we've seen this with things like Code Academy and other sort of platforms like that. And also we wanted to create ongoing opportunities for soldiers to pick up relevant skills. So we wanted to create value for the individual CPT operator to engage in this training and actually spend time doing it. After we developed that MVP, we were able to reestablish contact with our sponsors, and they had the following feedback. So as it stands, the training methodology seems fairly comprehensive and well conceived. Right, so it turns out that it wasn't an issue at all. And then they also said that CPT operators would pursue learning about cyber even in their downtime. So this coming directly from someone who is the XO of the training battalion, who has a very thorough understanding of the training space, told us that we needed to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate our hypotheses, and that led to our first pivot. So this is the mission model canvas for the training. And of course, the value proposition was if you improve training, you decrease the amount of time that's required to train these individuals. You would also increase the efficiency and their aptitude at being able to address the threat and contain the threat. So if you have better trained operators, they're better able to accomplish their job, and you're going to decrease the workload. One of the things that we kept hearing from our sponsors when we spoke to them is, hey, we can't talk to you because we're too busy doing other things. So we figure, well, if we provide better training and we allow you to do your job better, then that workload gets more spread out. Because one of our interviewees said that you have 20% of CPT operators doing 80% of the work, right? And that sort of kind of mismatch obviously leads to inefficiencies in other places. So our beneficiaries were at multiple levels. So you had the kind of higher level cyber protection team as a whole, then you have the individuals that are kind of on the managerial side, and you of course have training command and the recruit, Kimber herself. And mission achievement, so again, decreased time to properly train and develop a capable operator, decreased workload, and then increased operational capacity for the CPT as a whole. So this is, again, the MVP. It would look like a sort of gamified platform that would allow soldiers to kind of train as they play, right? So you want them to be in as realistic of an environment as possible, and this would also incorporate some of the capabilities from DARPA's Plan X. And as you can see on the bottom, this is kind of who we envision the archetype of the user. So if you can't tell, that's someone in recruit training on the bottom, someone who's fairly young and inexperienced, and then someone, presumably an intern, scratching his head because he has no idea what he's doing. And it turns out that these archetypes were completely false, right? So these CPT operators are actually very well educated, with their training taking a very long time. So they're very skilled both technically and also practically.
That led to a pivot to automation when we saw that there wasn't a market for the training platform. One of the major pain points that we had expressed to us from many of the people down at Fort Gordon was a lack of integration with DARPA's Plan X, which was a visual insight into the cyber battlefield, and also the automation capabilities of the Cyber Protection Brigade. So one revealing interview with the Chief Warrant Officer, David Lucy, a technical gentleman himself, was that he has two guys that basically just review Windows output threat logs every day and then decide, you know, is this information important to another operating entity, or where can I route this? It wasn't routed automatically. It wasn't consumed by a centralized system or uploaded into a database that could be queried by different divisions of the armed forces. It was basically an individual operator's decision who'd pass that information along to. That obviously provided an opportunity of investigation for us. And this is the associated mission model canvas, in which many of our beneficiaries remain the same, but we had a greater focus on the actual operators and trying to remove some of the mundane components of their job. You just click through. This is the associated workflow for the automation problem. And the main pain, we were very enthused about the automation problem. It seemed like a lot of information to begin working on. One of the main obstacle that we didn't foresee when beginning the process was our lack of security clearance and the disclosure issues that we were going to face. When we started speaking more with the technical people down at Fort Gordon, we found that their environment consisted of 31 publicly available software packages in addition to 10 or 11 that were classified. So we had requested output logs to see just what we were dealing with, or a remote connection in which we could participate in that environment. And they attempted to get that authorization for us, but ultimately it just couldn't be disclosed. And without that level of access, we couldn't provide a viable automation product. And then we tried to find a second inroad into the automation arena through DARPA, but again, we ran into the same issue in which we weren't privy to all the needed information and access capacity that were required. And then just in the downtime between automation and just awaiting authorization from people, we had looked for funding avenues for automation, because we just thought we were going to go to these folks and they would have a problem ready for us. They would hand it to us. That's what we would work on. After a little bit of time, a few weeks in the course, we found that that wasn't going to be the optimal route to take. So we tried to look for third-party funding sources. One was an SBIR grant, in which we just had to form an LLC and we could appeal for government funding if it was going to be a knowledge-based venture. That's an avenue that we tried to pursue, just so we could come to the folks at either DARPA or at Army Cyber Command with a functioning MVP, that had a technical capacity that could integrate with their system or provide some level of functionality they didn't currently have. But in continued conversations before the application go through the whole SBIR process, we found a new pivot point that we pursued.
So the second pivot we made was with data standardization. So essentially, we discovered with automation, we have a lot of difficulty. We're not going to get a lot of the information we need, especially in the time that we need it to build something that can be automated to basically increase the efficiency of their work. So we looked at different avenues where inside of automation, something that we would actually have access to, can we find places to basically facilitate the flow of information. And we reached out a lot to third-party, like private companies to get information. And so one quote I'm going to read out is by Adrian Heller. And data standardization is an absolute requirement of companies that are shipped away from the defense in depth model. Merely being a part of a security ecosystem does not mean packages are complementary, and as a lack of communicative potential brought on by the non-standard data means that packages act as independent filters. These filters could be possibly redundant or contrary to other software in place. Adding packages does not linearly increase defense capabilities. So what he's really describing here is a practice basically to place tools that have a very similar function and basically use them to hope to catch a problem later down the line, but they don't communicate with each other. They all have different data types. So this move, basically, we had a lot of good support with automation, but ultimately we decided we couldn't move forward. We weren't going to get a complete tech stack, and we weren't going to get threat logs. So we decided to move, yes, to standardization, basically focusing on continuous monitoring and event correlation, which are specific fields in here that you would use. And basically, we have these three tools on each side. Basically, they look at the same information, and they come up with the same output information, but their logs and the way they store the data is different. And we wanted to take advantage of that.
So because of the issues getting some of the tech stack, getting some of the communication, the cold call that we made to one of our original points of contact, we made a flight down to Fort Gordon, which was really informative. It was really great to be able to actually see the fort, talk to beneficiaries, not just our initial contact, but people within various roles in Cyber Protection Brigade. That's that visit. And so basically this resulted in a few conversations. Basically us going back on all of these MVPs that we kind of described and them mentioning that while they were great ideas and there were, to some extent, different extents, definitely problems to solve. The primary issue was that there were a lot of clearance issues around being able to move forward with those. So even if we had made some strides in some of those other MVPs, it possibly would have been halted at some point in the integration process. So one of the things that kept coming along during our visit was this fact that there were so few civilian roles hired for out of the amount allotted. So this is basically the kind of point of where we ended up in this discovery process. And the good thing is that the Cyber Protection Brigade seems very excited about solving for this. So our problem statement has shifted to being able to helping them with their hiring process, focusing specifically on the technology for interviewing new hires, which they are now focusing on student interns or recent graduates. I can kind of skip through all of these since we are, pardon me? We're out of time? Okay. Thank you. All right.